Jom den den jam be yong la sa sa lo dong de lo de nye den nye tra nam da rab sa la ve ji nye den ge ji jian zi zhi re nye je tu gra le gong zhen gong da se be zhen re ma re men dung re je ze ve ro soi gong la bu je dar ze yin la tu je yong den song Rodre che droi nyomo nye long le je cha droi dron ze chen ma re min sre dung re nyu go che nye chen ze ra de nam de ne ta jen sa ju tar sen yen den lu zo ja se tu yu ku chun tra chu dan chu nye jen de da le min jan be yong la yen de che 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 ra ve sre che da le de mo men ba rab sra ne ka dan den je jong lo to ba ye lo je po be no wa zal tu so kang ge tu je sre che ta wa tam je nam bon 담배 주는 열등배 고담대 로다샤 차르 자면사나 도제제레세 사인보 드바남 브라서 남겐보 삼바이 권도선 예외세진제라 사제 오 차르군도 시제 타니레 Tamke samye shage yung song shen, song che yin pe lam ken karma pa, mi she de be chi yue su ge tu. La su, ta he jase la nin su dun me, ngu shi de ma chik de pu la, tene te la yang nang se sum yung ge ba. Some year de bare te la semchi ji ju semchi ngu semchi ne Klapchalo lopchuru sum yöde bare.
Ngöshidla.
Ngöshid.
Jag menar sobdunde.
Som sobdun chasangla.
So we continue with the explanations of the 37 practices of a Bodhisattva. And as has been explained earlier, the text in terms of the 37 practices is divided into three parts. The first part sets forth that which causes the arising of the body mind. The second part explains about the body mind itself in its various perspectives, and the third part sets forth the different trainings by way of which, or the different practices and their various perspectives in terms of training, so that the body mind, once it has been generated, develops, so that the practitioner makes progress on the path where the aim is to actualize the body mind, to realize the body mind.
Lasso tene ta ti che du ta la ni so dun la sholo ko sum so dun yu na ne sholo ka dum bat re sha.
So from among the 37 verses that set forth these 37 practices, today's teaching starts out with number 7 of these 37.
Tindu sholoka dambati karatingi dosana tene ta rang la korwe dungal rani tolgona yang chapcho do churbachi la tengo biyo batang
korwe dungal rang tolgodu
jamne luame bachi la tengo batang yin chi la korwa le dal gogundu na yang jamne lumete ngotoy chego ba yin sa ta jamro sanget shege.
And verse number 7 sets forth the practice of taking refuge. Now, the practitioner himself, a perspective of his aim in terms of taking refuge, in objects of refuge, is to develop the capacity by way of taking refuge to free himself from the process of endless rebirths in various worldly existences. So, on a personal level, his aim is to go beyond the world and its workings. And in order for that to happen, it must be that the objects of refuge are unfailing or valid, as it were, in terms of them being able to afford that kind of protection. The protection which makes for the individual going beyond endless rebirths in worldly existences. That's one perspective. The second is in that the text that's explained is a text of Mahayana Buddhism. Therefore, you have here a second perspective in terms of the practice of taking refuge in various objects of refuge. The aspect which is about guiding others so that they too can go beyond taking endless rebirths in various worldly existences. And here again, the objects of refuge must be valid in that unfailingly, having taken refuge in them, the result is the accomplishing of that aim, the aim of going beyond the world. And the practitioner who may introduce others to this practice, therefore needs to make sure that his objects of refuge are valid in this regard. They do have the capacity to achieve the goal just described.
Techedu tatsasik darawate diredwala. Rayang korwe chunr chingwa ye jikten lwaye sushi chopar nu kanshir deteshir kanla jamna miluwe kunchok jamdo jase lalin sete tan jikten
Miluve Concho Sundua.
Jiktin di na tu penna top yuan kin, nguyen xie yuan kin, zun zhu yuan kin, nekap to
Top Nguyen
xie,
Tene?
then zun zhu la sokpa, ten ju yuan kin, nekap penpa ne pa nika che tung kin tende.
Nekap Penne.
Tene la songpa se yan rabu, wangshuk se yan rabu, ta tende ra minra.
Now, the verse reads as follows. Who can the gods of this world assist when they are themselves trapped in samsara's prison? Thus, when you seek help, taking the genuine refuge of the three jewels is the practice of a bodhisattva. So, in terms of a world system, there are various parts that the world system is divided into in terms of the different kinds of sentient beings inhabiting the various parts of the world system. And one of the parts of a world system is the part inhabited by so-called gods or divine beings. Individuals who have, from our vantage point, the vantage point of human beings, extraordinary powers, capacities, and so on, in terms of foreknowledge, the ability to work miracles, the ability to affect the circumstances of others, either in the context of harm or in the context of achieving good circumstances for others. So these individuals, from the perspective of human beings, are godlike. Hence, that's the label or the name we as humans have given to them. And in some religions, they are seen as the creators of the world we live in. They are said to be almighty. In Hinduism, for example, you have gods like Brahma, Ishvara, and others. To all of them, those qualities are attributed. They are seen as the creators of the world, as almighty and the like. And the same one finds in other religions as well, where the gods people take refuge in are seen as individuals with extraordinary powers, therefore called gods. They are seen as the creators of the world. They are seen as being almighty and the like.
Korwe, zunr chinshin tu sede, ta kamsum de, kamsum korban de, ta nangbelu la kamsum songi yare, tendu, korwe nende ne, zunkung tabu chire, segi yarwa, rangla rangwa mebich. Dene, dela chinshi ke, gyuda ma sona dangzin tere. Tene
Chegigyu dancing.
Dangzente. Tene Tatum Tamenda was Yonglu, Rangi Yonglu can on the Shimju Dang. Dame thing like Papa Jizan, Yomare. Tin do Koranzo Koravan on the chin they are Jebber.
Now, the text says that the gods, just described in brief, are themselves trapped in samsara's prison. Meaning they are in fact not almighty and the like. Buddhism divides a so-called impure world system, a worldly world system as it were, into three principal parts or sections. The higher section inhabited by gods who are on various levels. All of them are not seen as the creators of the world or almighty. It's rather the chiefs of all the gods who are attributed these qualities. However, according to Buddhism, even though the gods have these extraordinary powers, as it were, they are not yet free, meaning they are still entertaining the notion of a self, which obscures the mind to the extent where going beyond the world is not a possibility even. So they are neither free nor independent. They are also trapped in samsara's prison, like the rest of us, though they do have extraordinary qualities, seen as extraordinary or miraculous from the viewpoint of the intellect of human beings. So they are neither free nor independent of the influences of the workings of the world, and that brings us to the fact that they too, at the end of their very long lifespans, will take yet another rebirth in a worldly existence. Hence, they are neither free nor independent. And the religions which attribute the position of a god as the creator of the world, as almighty and the like, these religions do not teach the doctrine of no self. Hence it's, as it were, a given that neither the so-called creators of the world, the gods in question, nor their followers have knowledge of the doctrine of no self. Buddhism is the only religion in terms of our world system where the doctrine of no self is taught.
That's it, Nipa somewhere. Jictin fly, sushi chopper news. Tan jictin get la, to che, candid, you and a young.
Country? Utsiknipa.
Tsinipa.
Py kudila tanna transi. Ranyan kono. Aha, tene dechir dirwa.
Ya, tene jiktin la te koram korbe nande yue tsadu suchik korwa gen jikta tang ngin song dunga le chap tubu mare song re. Chapar nu song. Tsi sholoka nipate segya marida tsikye nipate.
Tsikche nipa.
Ya.
Yepa.
No. Ryan korbe tsönrö chingwa yin jikten la yi. Sushik chapar nu singet.
Oh, tsiknipa.
Yeah.
Sorry. Therefore, namely, as those gods, the Almighty, who are seen as the Almighty creators of the world by their followers, as they themselves are trapped in samsara's prison, they do not have the capacity, these worldly gods, to protect others from the suffering or the different types of suffering experienced in various parts of an impure world system, such as the three lower existences and so on. So they are not able to protect others from the fears, the kind of panic and so on that individuals may experience in various parts of an impure world system. They do not have this capacity, as they themselves are still trapped in samsara's prison.
Tene hi ome chike te deshir kangla chapna miluves yunsen tendela tenne chepre deshir sidi kangla sebikabla yul khande chila chapsu zungna nge chamjuk shuna jiktin le drolwan nupa chop nupa miluwe chamne
Therefore, it's the practice of a bodhisattva to take refuge when seeking help or assistance in terms of protection from worldly existences and suffering in them. A practicing bodhisattva therefore need to seek out the genuine refuge of the three jewels. The three jewels, these three objects of refuge, which all of them have the capacity to protect those who seek refuge in them from suffering in various worldly existences. In that their qualities, or rather in that their other worldly qualities permit them to help freeing others from rebirth in worldly existences, protection from suffering in worldly existences can be given. The three objects of refuge, the three jewels, in terms of helping sentient beings in this way, never fail, because they truly have the qualities needed to be able to free others from endless rebirths in worldly existences.
Tenetsi jibat songare kuncho jamro jasela yins. Ta ona tendeke perna jamnete kande kani songare sana sanje jamde deje songrabde songyores. Perna tsini som yunkinge jamnete.
And as was just said, this verse ends with stating that thus to take refuge in the three jewels is the practice of bodhisattvas. Sorry. Shi Chiksum. Tsikshipa, yeah. Now, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, set forth three specific characteristics of the objects of refuge in Buddhism, showing what, or explaining rather, or clarifying what kind of qualities are required in terms of being able to give protection to those trapped in samsara's prison.
Te karirasana kuncho sambotige koranso korwe tsawar jurbe dancing pang bichane nga korwala daltu gure jebat.
Zangpo.
The
first of the three is, these three characteristics, is that all three objects of refuge are free of the taint or types of taint associated with the notion of a self.
대가나 신게 딱 콘서 코르발 탈찬나 양 네 콘솔라 잡수 손에 콘서 좁그레베 세나 좁그레 콘서 코르발레 인 좁베게 코란서 담자이 와리제.
So thus the objects of refuge are beyond the notion of a self. Therefore, they do have the capacity to protect others from suffering in worldly existences in consequence of entertaining the notion of a self. And they will act to assist others in that, while still on the path, that's what they have pledged to do.
다가나 신게 콘솔 루메르베스나 레 클루아메바 가르스나 던담 똑블로 젠레스.
And they can do so unfailingly. There isn't even a shadow of a doubt as to their capacity. Why? Simply because they have actualized a realization of absolute truth. Now, you have the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We know that the Buddha Dharma is synonymous with the doctrine of Buddha Shakyamuni in this present era. So you may think it's odd to say that, or you may misunderstand here because of the wording or the words. How have a doctrine actualized a realization? Of course, that may sound odd. There will be further explanations. However, keep in mind that the doctrine, the Buddha Dharma, sets forth the doctrine of no self. Therefore, as to that doctrine, or that perspective of the Buddha Dharma, there isn't any taint of a notion of a self to be found. In that, the doctrine sets forth the opposite, the notion of, or rather, the realization of, or the wisdom associated with no self.
다원은 된제게 신이 something게 잠내
Senisum situ? Danga siju remaso. Dang po terava.
korwale dolwan nipagi chik
Re dame padan chik.
chop tubaki ni
Dundang tokpade.
ya
Kyop tupa.
den luame padu sum.
So, in terms of the three characteristics, the first is that of no notion of a self. The second has to do with protecting others, as that pledge has been made. And the third, sumpa, is that of being able to do so, or having, or being able to do so unfailingly, without fail.
Laso that tea into the ona singing something to sure sana sanjes tokpa tar simbe tokpate sanje kuncho then dambe chu tene dambe chu de ge yenten yu la jeve gendon kuncho te
Tenjönten de damchu gigönten de gula kene.
je simbe gendon pate kuncho sombo tires.
So who are, or what are the three objects of refuge? Well, the first is that of Buddha, a Buddha who has attained the enlightened state. So Buddha, the enlightened state, as it were. And the rare and supreme Buddha is the individual who have actualized the enlightened state, who is enlightened to the fullest extent. The second object of refuge is the sacred Buddha Dharma, as was just mentioned earlier. In terms of our era, it's about Buddha Shakyamuni's doctrine. The third object of refuge is that of the members of the noble Sangha, individuals who have gone beyond the world, but who have not yet attained enlightenment to the fullest extent, though they have attained various levels of enlightenment beyond the workings of an impure world system. And therefore have the capacity to guide others and the like. They therefore are objects of refuge.
Tatindrave kuncho sambotella chapsun rodu kandesin rogursana. Tilla tesam meve junsin hi channe tesam mevar lote yichi
Gyumtsen shene kidlon. Titsum mevar shene, yeah.
Lote yichi chenang gore yichi deba.
So, in terms of taking refuge in the three objects of refuge, the rare and supreme ones, as they are also known, how does one go about that? Well, one begins by acquiring knowledge of their qualities. One acquires a comprehensive knowledge of their qualities so that their capacities, their abilities, and so on, in terms of providing refuge, are, as it were, crystal clear to the practitioner who wants to do this practice, the practice of taking refuge in them, the three jewels. Once that crystal clear knowledge, free from doubt and hesitations, has been acquired, then the practitioner is able to take refuge in the three jewels on the basis of full confidence and trust in them.
Techedu pena sanje la tempa chö la lam gendon la lam je trog surdu japsun ronang gore.
That practitioner will have understood that the Buddha is an absolute guide, an unfailing guide. He will also have understood that the Buddha Dharma truly sets forth the path to Buddha, the enlightened state. And he also knows that the members of the Noble Sangha are guides capable of guiding others so that they can truly make progress on the path to enlightenment, or on their paths to enlightenment.
Then around the le tangpo ba japsun ro tu lunga yi sum ji go ne japsun ro go gyo tangpo yi ji go ne japsun ro wa se du kunsho sum la gyunsin shebe go ne then sem ting ne depa jeba tele go gyo sem ting ne depa jeba.
So a practitioner who wants to do this practice, that of taking refuge in the three jewels, needs to do so in words, thoughts, and deeds. Traditionally, set forth as the threefold division of body, speech, and mind. Now, in terms of the mindset, to begin with, the practitioner, as was just explained in brief, needs to have a good knowledge of, a comprehensive knowledge of, the qualities of the three jewels, so that he, with trust and confidence in them, takes refuge in them from the depths of his heart or his mind, however one wants to phrase it.
Nga gwen japsun rowa singe deta jebu tamba sogi song shabe jamju tsikje nga gwen then song ya
so in terms of the division words, thoughts and deeds, that would relate to thoughts, the mindset, how the person who takes refuge thinks as he takes refuge, as it were. And then we have, in terms of the word perspective, and here that's one of the perspectives, is that of voicing the words of the refuge formula or the refuge prayer.
Then the
And then we have deeds, meaning physical deeds, body. It's about physical deeds, so it's about physical deeds by way of which one expresses trust and confidence in the three jewels, for example, by way of bowing down to them with folded hands. And this way of taking refuge in the three jewels is common to both Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism.
That teaching like na mixal ke tene sewa hinje chimbe yulen ne
Junyen ne kan så.
sewa hinje chimbo go ne then da sentient tham je kunjo som na japsun ro lot go ge.
The extra feature, as it were, in terms of this practice in the context of Mahayana Buddhism is the following, namely that the practitioner also, on the basis of cultivating great compassion, great in that it's about compassion for all sentient beings in number as vast as the sky. And the practitioner takes refuge in the three jewels for his own sake and their sake. In fact, the second perspective, that of others, would be more important than the personal perspective in terms of a genuine practitioner of Mahayana Buddhism.
Dela kwane shochi la pena tsewa singeta hinje singente ni tenchik ge kwa robsam tenchik bare samsam raw thu de konken tendendo de yina en dingi le chepar yo.
Now there in specific two mindsets that are emphasized, or two thoughts simply, in terms of the perspective of others and aiding them, assisting them, that of loving kindness and that of compassion. Now, if one doesn't give careful thought to what the words one deals with truly mean, they appear to be somewhat two synonyms. There isn't much of a difference in the minds of most as to loving kindness or compassion. However, there are quite marked distinctions made between the two in terms of the various perspectives of what these two words are about, meaning-wise.
Te kareresana penna tsewa seunde yin dungal ke narwachik tongwe sena zömmitbe lojewa tal tsewa chewde ninje sengente ti dungal te shivar chebe
Di dungal
te shivar chebe thamla lapatre.
Of course, I can't sit here and say with 100% certainty that in terms of the English language, these definitions apply, because these two words are explained in the context of Buddha Shakyamuni's doctrine. So, in terms of words used in the Buddhist doctrine, at least, then there are quite sharp differences, meaning-wise, between these two words. So please don't misunderstand. Think of that we're dealing with the Buddha's doctrine here and the meaning of these two words in that specific context. It's not about the English language in general. It's not from that perspective that we're looking at differences between these two words. It's in the context of the Buddha's doctrine. So, loving kindness in Buddhism is about a strong feeling of pity for someone else, in the context of loving kindness for the someone else when seeing the someone else suffer. One has a feeling of pity for the person because of one's loving kindness of the individual, whether it's a human being, an animal, or otherwise, when seeing how the individual suffers. It becomes unbearable to one. It's difficult to witness the suffering of the individual in question, simply because of the mindset of this person being, to some extent, a mindset of loving kindness. When there is love for another, it is extremely difficult to see that other individual in difficult circumstances. To the point where one can't bear seeing or witness what's happening. So that's what a mindset of loving kindness is about in general. It's a general description of that mindset of loving kindness. in the context of Buddhism. Then there is compassion. Compassion, as it were, goes further. When seeing the same, there is the response, the compassionate response of doing anything in one's power with the aim or for the sake of bringing this person out of his or her suffering, assisting, helping, doing whatever one can in order to help the person out of the situation. And in terms of developing the mindset of loving kindness and the mindset of compassion, as just described, one needs to take the help of various methods found in the cycle of teachings named mind training. So one starts out training in loving kindness. You train your own mind so that it becomes more and more, or to a greater and greater extent, it develops the kind of love for others or loving kindness for others just described in brief. And it may not be so prevalent that people have this loving kindness, this level of it to begin with. And therefore, the majority of people need to train themselves by using the various methods of mind training. And one example would be to begin by simply visualizing an animal in distress. In order to begin with, one needs to find out one's personal extent for loving kindness. Which level am I at? Am I a person of loving kindness, or perhaps not very much? So one can therefore just start out visualizing or watching on the television program an animal in distress and suffering. To begin with, one then will know one's own reaction, to what extent one is concerned, as it were, with the suffering of the animal, and then go from there. And one trains oneself in these and other ways. There are numerous methods in the context of so-called mind training, till one's loving kindness for all others is such that one's response to seeing them in distress and circumstances of suffering is that one can't bear seeing them suffer the way they suffer. One simply has to act. So one has, in one's development, then reached the level where compassion has reared its head, as it were. One wants to actively do something to help the other in circumstances of suffering and distress. So one doesn't shy away from it. It's not the reaction of, oh, I don't want to touch this type of thing. It would be too much trouble or whatever. One simply can't do anything but trying to help the one in distress and suffering.
The Togme de Nimarere Chandu Rang Simla Takjen Nachen.
Kangi Rikchenla?
Tapen Nije Sengenta. Sewa Sengenta.
Rangla Katseyume.
Kaseyume Rang the Rand Takje Tangne. The Kale Kamchuda, then Kamro.
So the practitioner here needs to look at himself on a daily basis in terms of his own mindset and what the level of loving kindness and what the level of compassion there is or isn't, and progressively familiarize his mind with loving kindness and compassion till it becomes a more natural part of his mindset.
Lasso thing and there, Tapa Chwachile Degido, the Chödrak also Shushabi.
So that ends the explanations for today in terms of the 37 practices. Khenpo Rinpoche will give some explanations regarding a question that's asked quite frequently. As to the rest of this teaching session, yeah.
Meji Hisonga Yina Tige Rupatan Teladab Mashne Tenso Tene Chumo Kongara Gunan Yugado Te Yagarbe Luxo Pearl Shin Shuk Sons Redan Kandere Sian Trawashi Leg to Tongote.
Pökinang Pati Kangala Lugin,
that Manchak Lugrete. The Luxurgire dan Chödrak Tenphel Gachire Trawashi Leg.
One of the questions is the following. The various questions are asked in various contexts, but they do have the common denominator of asking what are the practices in Tibetan Buddhism in terms of what one does with the ashes of a deceased person. One of the questions here is the following, namely, it's asked by people who perhaps have visited the Indian subcontinent and seen that many Tibetan Buddhists who live on the Indian subcontinent, they spread the ashes of deceased relatives in the river Ganges. So the question frequently asked in terms of this category of people who are aware of this is this just a tradition, or a general tradition in terms of what one does with the ashes of a deceased relative? Or is it a specific Buddhist practice?
Hindu background.
Of course, this is in the context of Hinduism, the largest, almost common religion in India. There it is a religious right to do so. It's sort of what we would here call the funeral of the person. And there the ashes are spread in the waters of the river Ganges. As a religious practice. Yes. Now, in terms of Tibetan Buddhists doing the same, the reason for them doing it is the following.
Lo dön rotsarache lo yepege dege yanne de Quran mayam bitundala sumshasam la pesumare sumshasam la yardawasum jugne
Lasso
tene yanne de tuyung tu tene lui yabu madreba singedege
lui gyalpo
madreba
Sanskrit nemishi.
Nge Sanskrit nemishi.
Madrepa, yeah.
Madrepa ge yinchi mini Quran ge nele pero nangs. Dene tanda gaye Quran ge nele nungro nangs.
O gaye de. Quran ge nela.
Now shela ko pubiens. Shune jamden de so madrepa le peson.
What is it called? Mount Kailash.
Kailash. Lake Sarovar signal.
Sarovar, is it?
Sarovar.
I'll just look it up.
That la jamne de pe tene kor junchu yebe dacha mangapya de che de chene ngapya
Drachompa
ya
Lasso
pe tene sonyam den do she te channe lui jalbo madre pa sungjup chu de semje de Konda linki to lui jalbo tang ta te lui khor shewa mangbo che shongchup cho de semje do tene lui jalbo madre ba singge de ge kong sangje tongge jinda shu ju ge tamcha che do madrepa
ta Sakya tupa angi shipara wa
jabade
ngon chungwei sangje sum kongjinda chutsare
tene shangchup cho to semje ta korang monam peme mongo chi jabre to tene monam ke thama the ngara tanda nesa ge chondigi chu kangdu bhamna jeon namke
chu de kangdu bhamna
ya
dina sentient
te chunde lo longjo ke changna nasa tang digdip dhatu basho sen kong malam jabre do te sanje ki yang te jin dun jong churchi se de me jedu tendel tene chuna luna shibotel pento yore sen lugbe luksue te tene zong de tanda ba de chung de bachira.
So
pento yugyo sare.
Now you have to hear in terms of the waters of the river Ganges. You have to think of its source and that river flowing from the source, from its source down through the Himalayas down to the plains of the Indian subcontinent. Now, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, in the 8th year after his enlightenment, towards the end of the summer retreat that year, he went to the highest level of the God realm within the desire realm, the part of our world system we inhabit, the 33rd level, as it were, for the sake of his deceased mother who had taken rebirth there, for the sake of teaching and guiding her to liberation from yet another rebirth in a worldly existence. And Buddha Shakyamuni spent 3 months in this place. At the end of which he was approached by the Naga king Matrapa. That's the Tibetan translation of the Sanskrit name of the same Naga king. He was approached by the Naga king, who resides at the Sarovar lake at the foot of Mount Kailash. And the waters of that lake are connected with or originate with then the source of the river Ganges. So, as was said, Buddha Shakyamuni had left the summer retreat for the sake of guiding his mother to liberation from yet another rebirth in worldly existences. Having accomplished this, he had then returned and been approached by the Naga king, and towards or at the very end of a summer retreat, there is the tradition of festivities, as it were, in celebration of having accomplished the summer retreat. And the Naga king approached Buddha Shakyamuni here, requesting him to come to his land, Lake Sarovar at the foot of Mount Kailash, and allow him to sponsor the festivities. It's a tradition to offer food and drink to the participants of the summer retreat at the very end of it. Buddha Shakyamuni agreed, and Buddha Shakyamuni, accompanied by 500 arhats, went to Lake Sarovar at the foot of Mount Kailash. And there the festivities took place. They were offered food, drink, offerings and the like by the Naga king, who on this occasion also, in the presence of Buddha Shakyamuni, generated the Bodhi mind. Not only him, but also a number of minor Naga kings and others did the same in the presence of Buddha Shakyamuni. And the Naga king Madrepa at the time pledged to sponsor the same event in connection with all the 1,000 Buddhas that are to appear during this era, the era we live in. Buddha Shakyamuni is the fourth. There have been 3 previous Buddhas, and this Naga king did sponsor the same celebrations during their periods as well. And he then here made the additional pledge of doing the same in connection with the remaining Buddhas of this era, the 1,000 Buddhas of this era. Just a second. He also voiced many aspirations, or he pledged to, in the future, benefit others by way of practicing the path to enlightenment to the extent where these pledges could be actualized, that he would be able to perform extraordinary deeds for the good of all. And some of them are the following. Namely, that the waters of Lake Sarovar, his kingdom, wherever the waters flowed from that lake, any sentient being coming in contact with these waters, he made the aspirations that they would come to find themselves in good circumstances, free of disease, that the waters of his lake would purify them of the evil deeds that they had engaged in, and other aspirations he voiced on this occasion in the context of him generating the Bodhi mind in the presence of Buddha Shakyamuni, and Buddha Shakyamuni then responded with voicing the same words, that the waters coming from this lake would benefit sentient beings in the ways the Naga king had aspired to. And this is the reason for Tibetan Buddhists, Tibetans, who live on the Indian subcontinent, spreading ashes of their deceased in the river Ganges. Because the waters from this lake flow later on into the waters of this river. And Khenpo Rinpoche explains, there seems to be some benefit in coming in contact with these waters, yes, in terms of the deceased. Now, in terms of Tibetan Buddhism, there are also other practices in terms of the ashes of deceased, in terms of the bones of the deceased, parts of their skeletal frame that have survived the cremation fire, as it were, to collect these and spread them in the 8 main places of pilgrimage in Buddhism, or in the 8 great cremation grounds and places like that. Now, there is also the additional practice of Tibetan Buddhists cutting their nails and some hair and spread in the same places. And for Tibetan Buddhists to do so is regarded as very important. It's explained in the Buddhist Tantras that if ashes, bones of deceased individuals, as well as nails and strands of hair of the living, are spread in those places, there are benefits for the following reason. Namely, that Buddhas of the past and great Bodhisattvas, not just Buddhas of the past, one would rather say, I suppose, of past, present and future, as well as such Bodhisattvas, who have achieved either Buddha, the enlightened state, of course the Buddhas have, the Bodhisattvas who have achieved a level of enlightenment where they have the capacity to manifest either in a Sambhogakaya form or a Nirmanakaya form, on the basis of having actualized to a very high level in terms of the Bodhisattvas the Dharmakaya, a realization of the so-called Dharmakaya. They very often manifest, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as what usually is named yogis. We can use that word as a collective name for all of them, who dwell in those places. And when they happen upon either the ashes or bones of the deceased or the nails and strands of hair of the living, they will make prayers for the individuals connected with these either physical remains or the nails and strands of hair of the living.
Chepar tu yang ngan song be ne nye ji sing kin den zolla. Cham den de kholu dam batang. Chakra sambara tang. Yum doje phangmo. Beza warahe namba ni ge tulbe kurere tapar yug de yo chat.
And in the 24 Buddhist tantric places, in each of them, there is always the presence of Chakra Samvara and his consort Vajravahari in each of them. So these places as well are places where physical remains would be spread, or practitioners would leave behind there nails and strands of hair.
Then you should say
or clippings of nails rather.
Then you should say so te jagar doji dinwa.
And the most important and the principal one of these 24 Buddhist tantric places is that of Bodh Gaya.
The inter this you yet pug looks samare del gopa chambo yede. Kashe pug looks the second of machine gadget.
Now there are those who take the view that doing what was described it's just a Tibetan tradition. No, it isn't. It really isn't. It's not just a Tibetan tradition. So that's all for today.
Sunamdaya Damje Zagbani Tomnanye Bedanam Pamjet Jaganache Balap Trubaye Sigbe Tolen Rowa Rowa